Bedtime Reading. The Scarlet Letter. Chapter 1. The Prison Door. A crowd of bearded men and tired-looking women in poor clothing stood in front of the door to the prison. The original residents of the town had built a prison and a cemetery before constructing most other buildings in the town. The frightening-looking prison was quite near the cemetery. Inside the prison, the main view through the window was of the cemetery. Like all that relates to crime, it seemed that the prison never looked youthful or new, but rather looked always ugly and terrifying. In front of the prison was a piece of grass, on which a great amount of weeds had grown. Just near the door to the prison, however, grew a wild rose bush, covered in tender blossoms. One could imagine this to be a last offering of beauty to the prisoner as he went into the feared place, showing nature's pity and kindness. This rose bush had stayed alive, but no one in the town knew how the small gift from nature survived. Many believed that the bush had come up before the original residents of the town had arrived, and the tiny plant had not been cut down as the great trees surrounding it had been. Others insisted that the bush had sprung up after the noble religious leader, Anne Hutchinson, had entered the prison after speaking against Puritanism. She was taken to the town prison, but was later removed from the town. Chapter 2. The Marketplace. On the one piece of grass on Prison Lane, one certain summer morning, more than 200 years ago, a crowd of Boston residents watched carefully for the great door of the prison to open. In later years, people gathered in great numbers only for famous criminals to be killed in public. However, during the time when the strict Puritans ruled Boston, rather harmless mistakes were considered serious and shameful. Perhaps a child would be beaten in the town square as a punishment for being ungrateful to his parents, or possibly that a witch, like old Mistress Hibbins, the angry wife of the town's judge, would be hung. During this time, religion and law were considered to be the same. A small crime was considered to be as terrible as the worst of crime, and criminals were punished strictly. The criminals would find no pity from the crowd, as the townspeople stood watching eagerly as the prisoner suffered greatly. Our story begins on a summer morning when the town gathered to watch the suffering of another criminal. On this particular day, there were quite a number of women present, who all showed great interest in the event. The women of this time had recently come from England, and were much less proper and polite than the ladies of later generations. The women of Puritan times were rough country women, always looking forward to observe a prisoner being killed. With each generation after, however, women became more tender, proper, and civil.
"Listen, ladies,"
said a country woman of 50 years old.
"I tell you what I think. It would help society if we older women, being honest church members, should handle such evil women as this Hester Prynne. If we 5 women decided the punishment for that terrible woman, do you believe we would have given her the punishment the town judges have offered her? I believe not. People say,"
said another,
"that Mr. Dimsdale, her minister, has become quite upset that such a terrible crime happened in his religious community. The judges are God-fearing gentlemen, but too pitying. That is the truth,"
added a third older woman.
"They should have, at least, marked Hester Prynne's forehead with a hot iron, so she will never forget her crime. That would have troubled her, but she, the naughty little woman, cares little about her punishment of the Scarlet Letter on the front of her dress. She can easily hide the letter with a pin, and walk the streets without shame." "Ah, but—"
interrupted another more softly, a young wife, holding a child by the hand.
"Let her cover the letter, as she will always feel shame in her heart. Why do we talk of marks, whether on her dress or on her forehead?"
cried another female, the ugliest as well as the most pitiless of the women.
"This woman has brought shame to our community, and should die. Is there no law for it? Of course there is, in the words of God."
"Be quiet now, foolish woman!" exclaimed a man in the crowd. "The prison door is opening, and here comes Mistress Prynne herself." The door of the prison sprang open, and there appeared, like a black shadow coming into the sunshine, the prison guard with a sword at his side. This person represented the strictness of Puritan law, which it was his duty to give the final punishment to the criminals. He carried his sword in his left hand and laid his right hand on the shoulder of a young woman, who he dragged forward. At the doorway to the prison, she resisted him, showing her bravery and independence as she stepped into the sunlight. She held a child, a baby of 3 months old, who turned its head from the light. The baby's life had, until then, been only in the dark prison. It had never seen the light of day. When the young woman, the mother of this child, stood in front of the crowd, she held the baby close to her chest, not to show motherly love, but to hide her sign of punishment. In a moment, however, she showed the front of her dress to the waiting crowd. They soon viewed an elegantly sewn letter A, which was artistically done in fine red cloth surrounded by rich gold thread. The rare piece showed a great amount of skill, which Hester had done herself. The elegant piece was of much greater quality than was allowed in the town. The young woman was tall, with grace and elegance. She had a great amount of dark hair that shone in the sunlight, and a face more beautiful than any other, with dark, mysterious eyes. She was polite and well-mannered, with a tender look. She had never looked as elegant and ladylike than ever before when she was taken out of the prison. Many in the crowd were astonished that her look of grace and confidence remained after her long stay in the prison of terrors. Her beauty shone through her misfortune. Her clothes, which she had made for the occasion, seemed to show her spirit, full of disobedience and strength. Everyone in the crowd was attracted to the fantastically sewn letter on her chest. Both men and women stared at the grand piece of needlework on Hester's chest.
"She has good skills in needlework, that's certain,"
remarked one of the female observers.
"but she has surely found a way to make pride out of her punishment. I believe we should take her dress from her tender body and replace that red letter which she sewed so patiently, and I'll give her one of my old rags I wore when I was ill. That would be more suitable for her punishment." "Oh, peace, neighbors, peace,"
whispered their youngest companion.
"Do not let her hear you. She feels the pain of the needle in her heart."
The old prison guard then took Hester Prynne and her child to the marketplace, where every man, woman, and child could see her brave clothing. A crowd of eager and curious schoolboys, not understanding the reason for her lonely walk to the marketplace, ran before her, turning back to stare at her and the child. Hester looked proud during her shameful walk. She did not show the great pain she suffered, as if her heart had been torn from her body and thrown on the street for all to observe. She was then taken to a platform in the middle of the marketplace, where she was told to stand so all the town could see her in her shame. For many years, several prisoners had been hung on this platform, where the town would meet to watch the killing. Hester's punishment was to stand for a certain amount of time on the platform. She walked up the steps and was then displayed to the surrounding crowd, looking high and strong. This beautiful woman, holding her child to her chest, looked much like the ideal picture of motherhood. But for Hester Prynne, she had committed the most evil of crimes a woman could. The crowd was curious about the grand letter sewn onto her chest, although, with their silence, they also gave Hester a great deal of guilt and shame to feel. The leaders of the town, who stood together on a balcony looking down at Hester, showed nothing but angry shame. The crowd thus did the same. Hester hoped that the crowd, with its hateful looks, was instead laughing at her, so she could give a bitter, proud smile. She felt, at the moment, as if she needed to scream and throw herself from the platform to her death, but she could not. Yet, as she stood proudly to bear her punishment, the crowd disappeared at times as she remembered events from her life before this terrible affair had begun. She remembered school days, sports, childish quarrels, and her years as a young woman. Perhaps these memories were her spirit attempting to relieve her troubled mind from the terrible stress of the current punishment. Standing there, high above the crowd, she remembered her home village, far away in England, and her parents' home, small yet noble. She remembered her father's face, covered in a white beard. Her mother's, too, with a look of anxious love, always worried about her daughter's choices in life. Hester remembered her own face as a young woman, full of girlish beauty. Then she remembered the face of an older man, pale and thin, always studying and reading, with a misshapen left shoulder. This was the face of her husband, who promised to meet her in America, although she had left for the new country more than 2 years ago. Next, she remembered her first days in the new city in America, with its narrow streets, the tall gray houses, the huge churches, and the public buildings, rather old and plain. Lastly, she remembered her punishment, staring at the crowd of people, showing her looks of hate. Yes, it was she, Hester Prynne, they were staring at, holding a small child in her arms, and the letter A in scarlet, elegantly sewn with gold thread upon her chest. Could it be true? She held the child closely, then looked down at the scarlet letter, and even touched it with her finger, to assure herself that the child and the shame were real. Yes, these were her realities. All else in her life was gone. Chapter 3. The Recognition. Hester soon turned to see, on the outside of the crowd, an American Indian, dressed in native traditional-style clothing, but it was common for the American Indians of the nearby areas to enter the town. By the American Indians' side stood a white man dressed in a strange mix of English and American Indian-style clothing. He was a small man with an older-looking face. Hester noticed that the man's left shoulder was slightly misshapen. She then pulled her child close to her, forcing the poor baby to cry in pain, but the mother did not seem to hear it. At his arrival in the marketplace, and some time before she saw him, the stranger had noticed Hester Prynne. At first, he had not recognized her, but very soon, however, he gave a look of angry hate. His face darkened as he realized that she knew him. He then quietly raised his finger to his lips, as if to tell her to keep his identity as her husband a secret. He then turned to the townsman next to him. "Good sir," said he, "who is this woman? Why has she been punished?" "You must be a stranger, friend," answered the townsman, "or you surely would have heard of Mistress Hester Prynne and her evil doings." She has dishonored herself and the church of Minister Dimmesdale. This evil woman had come over to America from England nearly 2 years ago. She was the wife of an English professor who had not yet come to meet her, as he had business affairs to settle. This woman has been a settler here in Boston, with no news from her husband, this gentleman professor, Master Prynne. His young wife has been alone here and come into trouble, with no husband here to care for her. "Ah, I understand," said the stranger with a bitter smile. "The old professor should be the father of this babe, nearly 3 or 4 months old, which Mistress Prynne is holding in her arms." "Honestly, friend, no one knows the name of the father," answered the townsman. "Madam Hester absolutely refuses to speak the name of the child's father. Perhaps the guilty man is present with us, looking at this sad woman, and forgets that God sees him." "The old professor," said the stranger, with another smile, "should come himself to discover the truth. The usual punishment for this crime is death, but this woman is youthful and alone, having no one to care for her. Perhaps her husband is indeed dead. The town judges have pitied this woman, and have declared that she will not die for her crime, but will instead stand on this platform for 3 hours. Then, for the rest of her life, she will wear that scarlet letter on her chest as punishment. This punishment seems to be much wiser than that of death. She will forever remember her terrible crime, although it upsets me that the partner in her crime has not stood with her on the platform. But he will be known. He will be known. He will be known." While this was happening, Hester Prynne had been standing on the platform, continuing to stare at the stranger. All else around her had disappeared, as she had become focused on the stranger. Although she was quite ashamed at seeing him again in this manner, she was thankful she did not have to meet him. It was better to stand in front of 1,000 people than to meet him alone. She was so focused on the stranger that she hardly heard the voice speaking to her. "Listen to me, Hester Prynne," said the voice. Speaking from the balcony above her platform, Governor Bellingham, the leader of the town, sat proudly with 4 other town leaders by his side. He was an older man, strict and commanding with his townspeople. These leaders were good, fair men, but were not the most able to decide a punishment for the mistake of a young woman's heart. As she heard the governor speak her name, she turned her head toward the town leaders and became pale and nervous. The town's most famous minister, John Wilson, the oldest minister in Boston, then stepped down to speak to her. He was a kind but fair man who believed that Hester had made a terrible mistake. "Hester Prynne," said the minister, "I have spoken to my dear friend, Minister Dimmesdale, your religious leader, and have asked that he persuade you to speak the name of your child's father," he said as he turned to a pale-looking young man. "You must no longer hide the name of the man who has tempted you to do evil. But Minister Dimmesdale opposes me. He believes it to be wrong to force you to tell your secrets in front of the crowd of people. I have tried to persuade him, as your partner in this crime should be known. What do you say, Brother Dimmesdale? Shall you persuade this poor prisoner, or shall I?" There was silence for a moment before the noble Governor Bellingham spoke. "Good Minister Dimmesdale," said he, "the responsibility of this woman's soul is yours. You should, therefore, persuade this young woman to admit the name of her... Chapter 5. Hester at her Needle. Hester's time as a prisoner was now over. The prison door was opened, and she walked into the sunshine, which she would rather avoid, as her scarlet letter shone brightly in the sun, reminding all of her terrible mistake. She was no longer kept in the prison, protected from the hateful townspeople. Now she must learn to live in the community with her child and her scarlet letter. The young children in town would be taught to look at her, with the scarlet letter flaming on her chest, as nothing but an evil, sinful woman. Within the settlement of Boston, there were no laws declaring that Hester was not free to return to her birthplace or to any other European land, and there hide her identity and shame. It seemed incredible that this woman remained in the community that gave her so much suffering and pain. Her great crime, however, kept her in the limiting Puritan society. She was now unable to leave. Every other place was now foreign to her. She realized, as well, that the partner in her crime was there, whom she could never leave. She felt the two were connected through the union of their child. Although they were not married on earth, she believed they would be together after death. Over and over again, she thought of this with great joy. Although, perhaps this hope of being together with her lover in the afterlife was a way to bear the pain and suffering she lived every day in the strict Puritan society. She reasoned that because she suffered so greatly on earth, her soul would return to heavenly delight upon her death. Hester Prynne, therefore, did not leave. Near the outside of the town, she lived quietly with her child in a small cottage with no close neighbors. With the little money she had, Hester established herself with her child in that home. The area became quite curious for the rest of the town, as no one else lived nearby. Children, too young to understand why this woman was not accepted in the community, would walk quietly to the window to see Hester with her needle sewing near the cottage window, or standing in the doorway, or working in her little garden, and the scarlet letter always on her chest. After a curious look at the mysterious woman, the children would then run away with quiet fear. Although Hester's life became quite lonely, and without a friend on earth, she did not suffer from poverty. She had an excellent skill in needlework, which was shown in the elegant sewing of her scarlet letter. She had an imaginative talent, with the ability to sew beautiful pieces of clothing that looked like clothing a noble king would wear. She was often requested to sew elegant material for town ceremonies and baby clothes. After some time, Hester's needlework became the fashion in the community. The governor of the community, military men, ministers, all employed Hester to sew their clothes. Babies also wore clothing sewn by the criminal woman, but no one in the community ever requested her to sew a wedding dress, which shows how strongly remembered her crime was within the town. Hester worked a great deal and was paid well, considering her low position in society. She spent very little on herself, wearing the poorest of clothing, aside from the elegant scarlet letter always on her chest. For her young daughter, however, she found the best quality material to sew the most fanciful of clothing. Her child's clothing added to the mysterious charm of the young girl. The rest of her income she spent on charity work for the poor, and who often treated her terribly. When she was not occupied in other work, she was sewing clothing for the poor or delivering a small meal to a family with no supper. Although such families treated her quite rudely and often reminded her of her terrible crime. She never responded to their impolite comments, however. She spent many hours in sewing such clothing, with no one to thank her. She had a creative mind, which was shown in the artistic clothing she sewed. To Hester Prynne, the art of needlework became the way she expressed herself, as she did not allow herself to defend herself from the rude comments she often received from the townspeople. Hester Prynne continued as a member of the society that blamed her, but she never forgot her crime. There was nowhere in the community where she felt she belonged. She walked through town without looking at anyone in town, without any friends in the community. She was much like a ghost, walking beside the rest, speaking to no one. She refused to allow herself to enter society again, and never forgot her position in society as a guilty criminal, who would be punished the rest of her life. The poor, as we have already said, whom she helped with all the clothing and meals she could, took many opportunities to insult the one woman in the community who would help them. Women of high society would insult Hester after inviting her to their homes to perform her excellent skills in sewing elegant clothing, skills which the women greatly envied. Hester never responded to the women, aside from a look of embarrassment in her face. She was patient, a victim, indeed, but never prayed for these enemies, although she tried to forgive their evil remarks. Continually, and in many other ways, the Puritan townspeople reminded her of her terrible crime with the rudest of behavior towards her. Ministers in the town would gather a crowd of people around Hester to discuss the terrible crime she committed. If she entered a church, often the leader of the church would be giving a speech about sin, in which he spoke a great deal about Hester. After some time, she hated to be around children. When she would pass by, they would scream terrible things at her, most still too young to understand what their parents had taught them about Hester's crime. She suffered as well when strangers entered the town, observing her scarlet letter carefully with confusion and curiosity. Although she suffered greatly from the angry looks from strangers and townspeople, she never covered her scarlet letter of shame. Through the many years that she wore the letter, she never got used to the terrible looks, but seemed to suffer more in time. But sometimes, once in many days, or many months, she would see someone look at her scarlet letter with pity. Just a moment later, however, her suffering would return with another's angry look. Had Hester alone committed a crime? With the great amount of time alone, Hester's imagination affected her thoughts. She believed that with her scarlet letter she could see the terrible crimes that others had committed. When she realized this, she greatly feared it. She knew that if the truth were told, many in the town who looked pure would have a great scarlet letter on their chests as well. Hester hated knowing the terrible secrets of the other townspeople. Sometimes she would see one of the town's respected ministers look at the letter of punishment with a look of pity, and she wondered what terrible crime this religious leader of the community committed.
What evil thing has this man done?
Hester would wonder to herself. Or she would see one of the women in the community look at her chest with a look of embarrassment, as if she committed the same crime as poor Hester, although she did not have to suffer as Hester did. Those who treated Hester the worst had developed a terrible story about the scarlet letter. The story was spoken of often, which gave Hester a great deal of pain. The story went that the scarlet letter was not just cloth, but was a red-hot fire which burned Hester's chest, and the bright red letter could be seen at night as she walked alone in the dark. Chapter 6. Pearl. We have spoken very little about Hester's child, a lovely child, who was born out of a guilty love affair. Hester watched her young child carefully as she grew more beautiful and clever with time. Her Pearl. Hester had named her as such, not because the little thing looked like that of a calm, white, and peaceful pearl, but rather because Hester had suffered so greatly for her little treasure, Pearl. An oyster must become greatly disturbed and distressed to produce just one perfectly elegant pearl. Similarly, Hester had suffered greatly when Pearl had come to her. She named the child Pearl, as costing Hester a great price, bought with all her mother had, her mother's only treasure. How strange indeed! God had given her this lovely child for her punishment. Although Hester looked at her little treasure with more worried fear than hope for her future. Day after day, she watched her child's behavior carefully, fearfully waiting to notice some strange evil in her character to punish herself, as well as her mother, for Hester's terrible crime. Certainly the little girl looked perfect, with elegant beauty. Together with her own mysterious beauty and charm, her mother had bought the richest of material to dress her daughter in the most elegant of dresses. Walking through the town, with her own loveliness and the impressive clothing she wore, little Pearl looked like perfection. And yet, when the girl played wildly, with dirty and torn clothing, she still looked like a perfect being. Pearl had several aspects. She looked like a child princess, but had the spirit of a wild peasant baby. Throughout all, however, she showed her passion, which she never lost. If she had lost a bit of that passion, she would not have been Pearl any longer. Pearl was born as a result of a crime of passion, and therefore could not fit into the world. The child could not follow rules. A great law had been broken for Pearl to be born, and the result was a child whose self was beautiful and with great charm, but all in confusion. Families of those days were terribly strict, a great deal more than families of today. Children were often punished cruelly. Hester Prynne, the lonely mother of this one wild child, was quite strict with her little treasure, but never forgot how her daughter would suffer in the Puritan society because of Hester's crime. Hester was, therefore, rather tender with the child. But poor Hester did not have the skill to raise her wild daughter. After showing the child great tenderness and strictness, she realized that she had no control over her passionate child, and decided to let the child rule herself. Hester sometimes wondered if her child was indeed human, as her wild behavior and looks were quite strange, not like anything else she had ever seen. At times, after wondering such thoughts, Hester would rush to her child and hold her tightly to her chest, kissing her cheeks, not because of the love she felt for her child, but to assure herself that her dear treasure was real and not simply a dream. Hearing Pearl's little laugh as she held her daughter close to her, Hester sometimes began to cry passionate tears. Still, the only times she felt comfort was when the child slept. Then she was content in the quiet hours of her daughter's sleep, until little Pearl awoke. Pearl soon began to speak, and was soon capable of communication with the townspeople. Her mother would have been so pleased to hear her sweet voice among the other children's voices, but that could never be. Pearl was born to the hated woman in town, the product of an evil love affair. Little Pearl understood quite well that she was never to have a friend in the town. She was to be alone, just as her mother was. Since Hester came out of prison, she had never walked through the town without her dear child. In all her walks about the town, Pearl, too, was there, first as the baby in her arms, and afterwards as the little girl, small companion of her mother. As she walked next to her mother, she watched the other children playing together, but never tried to make a friend. If someone spoke to her, she would not respond. If the children gathered around her, as they sometimes did, Pearl would throw stones at them and begin to scream, which greatly upset her mother, because her screams sounded like a witch's words. The truth was that the little Puritans, terrible children as they were told to hate the mother and child, although the little ones did not understand fully. They spoke terrible words to Hester and her little daughter often, which greatly upset Pearl, and she therefore hated those children with all the hate she had. Hester knew that Pearl's great passion and wild behavior had come from herself, as she had felt those great emotions before Pearl's birth, and Pearl had received them when she was born. Although Hester had such feelings before, she had since become calm after having her child. At home, around her mother's cottage, Pearl imagined the townspeople and would create stories to entertain herself. Her baby voice would become old or young, male or female, to talk with. The pine trees, old, dark, and sad-looking, would become the Puritan community leaders. The ugliest weeds in the garden were their children, whom Pearl would angrily tear them out of the ground. Pearl would spend several hours telling stories to herself about the townspeople, although she would never imagine that she had any friends. She never created a friend, but only the bitter children of the town as her enemies. It was rather sad for her mother, who felt that she was the cause for her daughter having no friends. One strange aspect of the child's behavior has not yet been told. The very first thing that little Pearl noticed was not her mother's smile, but the bright scarlet letter on her mother's chest. One day, as the baby was lying on the bed, her mother leaned over and smiled. At that moment, the baby's eyes turned to the bright color of the scarlet letter, which she then grabbed, smiling as she did. Her mother turned away in shock and horror. After that time, the mother never felt comfort unless her little child was asleep. When she would look into her daughter's dark, beautiful eyes, she did not see herself, but rather a freakish being with an evil spirit. One afternoon, some years later, the mother and child were sitting in the cottage, while Pearl entertained herself with throwing flowers at her mother's chest, dancing and laughing when she would hit the scarlet letter. Hester had wanted to cover the letter, but refused, as she knew it was all a part of her punishment for her crime. She sat patiently, pale as death, looking sadly into little Pearl's wild eyes.
"Child, what are you?"
cried the mother.
"Oh, I am your little Pearl,"
answered the child. But while she said it, Pearl laughed and began to dance like a freakish little being.
"Are you truly my child?"
asked Hester. Hester secretly suspected that her strange little child knew the secret of her terrible scarlet letter, but the child said nothing.
"Yes, I am little Pearl,"
repeated the child as she laughed.
"You are not my child. You are not my Pearl,"
said the mother, and started to laugh. She often became playful during her worst suffering.
"Tell me then, what are you, and who sent you here?" "Tell me, mother,"
said the child seriously, coming up to Hester.
"Do tell me." "Your father is God, who sent you from heaven,"
answered Hester Prynne. But she was troubled as she said the words, which the child noticed. The child then touched the scarlet letter with her little finger.
"He did not send me,"
cried Pearl.
"I have no father in heaven." "Quiet, Pearl. Do not say such things,"
answered the mother, quite disturbed after hearing her daughter's words.
"He sent us all here. He sent even me, your mother. Or if God did not send you here, strange child, where are you from?" "Tell me, tell me,"
repeated Pearl, no longer seriously but laughing.
"It is you that must tell me."
But Hester could not tell her. She remembered many of the townspeople, when trying to discover the identity of Pearl's father and observing some of the child's strange behavior, had declared that the child had come from the devil. There were many stories of evil children being sent to their mothers because of terrible crimes their mothers had committed. Chapter 7. The Governor's Office. Hester Prynne went one day to the house of Governor Bellingham with a handsome pair of gloves, which he had requested she sew. She went to see the governor for a much more important reason than to deliver the pair of gloves, however. She had heard that some leaders in the community wished to take Pearl from her. Some believed that Pearl was an evil child of the devil's. They believed that the child must be given to a Christian family to be raised. One of the main supporters of this idea was Governor Bellingham. Hester was worried about her child's happiness, but knew that it was her right to raise her daughter. She then left her little cottage with her small companion. Little Pearl, of course, was dressed looking like a tiny princess, with the most elegant material in the area. Hester always dressed her daughter to match the fashion of the Scarlet Letter on her chest, which she wore as a punishment. And standing next to her in material just as fancy and elegant was her child, the Scarlet Letter in another form. The Scarlet Letter given life. The mother had tried to show the similarities between the Scarlet Letter and the clothing she dressed her child in. As the two came into the town, the children of the Puritans looked up and spoke to each other.
"Look, there is the woman of the Scarlet Letter, and the copy of the Scarlet Letter running along by her side. Come, therefore, and we will throw mud at them."
But Pearl, who was a fearless child, ran to the children, screaming loudly and kicking her feet. The children ran away immediately. After the children were gone, she returned quietly to her mother, looking up to smile into her face. They soon reached the house of Governor Bellingham and were led into the house by one of the servants. They were told to wait in the hall for a short time, as the governor was in a meeting. As they waited, the mother and daughter admired the high-class look of the home, with great paintings of Bellingham relatives and swords on the wall. Pearl walked around the room, looking at the decorations, and found a large mirror on one of the walls.
"Mother,"
cried she,
"I see you here. Look, look."
As Hester looked into the mirror, she noticed that the Scarlet Letter in the mirror looked to be the main feature of her appearance. She seemed to be hidden behind it.
"Come along, Pearl,"
said she.
"Come and look into the garden. We shall see some beautiful flowers."
She took Pearl to sit near the window, looking out at the garden. In England, flower gardens were quite popular, but in this old English gentleman's garden there were no flowers decorating the outside of the home. The ground in the new town was dry and difficult. Therefore, the garden had only dull vegetables planted. There were a few rose bushes, however, and a number of apple trees. Pearl, seeing the rose bushes, began to cry for a red rose and would not quiet herself.
"Quiet, child, quiet,"
said her mother.
"Do not cry, dear little Pearl. I hear voices in the garden. The governor is coming, and gentlemen along with him."
A number of people soon came towards the house. Pearl, wishing to disobey her mother, screamed loudly, then was silent. She was quiet not to obey her mother, but because she was curious about the appearance of these new people. Chapter 8. The Strange Child and the Minister. Governor Bellingham, an older gentleman, walked ahead of the rest, and was showing his grand home to the visitors. Near him was John Wilson, the oldest minister in the town, who had come to the town from England many years ago. The old minister, who had lived for many years as highly respected in the English church, and had lived quite a comfortable, rich life. Although he looked to be quite strict and serious as he spoke on Sundays to the townspeople, or in his disapproval of Hester Prynne's crime, he was indeed a gentle, loving man. Behind the governor and Mr. Wilson came two other guests. One, the minister Arthur Dimmesdale, who had spoken during Hester's public punishment so many years ago, when her child was a small baby. Standing next to him was his dear friend old Roger Chillingworth, a doctor of great skill, who for 2 or 3 years had lived in the town. He had become a good friend and doctor to the young minister, whose health had suffered greatly in the past few years because he worked constantly in his profession. The governor walked into the hall first, and was surprised to see little Pearl standing nearby. "And who is this young child in such fanciful clothing? Are you a Christian child, or are you one of those naughty children we left in England?"
"I am Mother's child,"
answered the little Scarlet Letter.
"and my name is Pearl."
"Pearl? You should rather be named Red Rose, with your rosy cheeks," responded old Mr. Wilson. "Where is your mother, little Pearl?" he asked as he looked around the room. "Oh, this is the child's mother, who we had spoken of earlier. Here is the unhappy woman, Hester Prynne, her mother." "Hester Prynne?" the governor said as he walked into the room. "We have been speaking of you lately. We are quite concerned about the future of your child. We are worried that you, who has committed a terrible crime, are perhaps not able to care for your child as a good Christian would. Speak now, the child's own mother. Do you agree that the child would be better cared with another family, taught about the rules of heaven and earth? What can you do for the child?"
"I can teach my little Pearl what I have learned from this,"
answered Hester Prynne, touching the Scarlet Letter. "Woman, it is your mark of shame," replied the governor angrily. "It is because of that terrible letter that we would move the child to another family's care."
"This mark of shame has taught me. It teaches me daily lessons that my child will learn from, although I cannot benefit from it."
"We will judge carefully," said Bellingham. "Good Minister Wilson, I advise you to examine this Pearl to discover if she has been raised like a good, honest Christian child." The old minister, Mr. Wilson, then sat down in a nearby chair and began speaking to the young child. "Pearl, do you know who made you?" Now, Pearl knew quite well who made her, as Hester was the daughter of good Christian parents, and she had spoken with her child many times about her Father, God in heaven, who had created her. The 3-year-old refused to speak, however, and instead climbed out the window to watch the birds flying around her. After a short time, Pearl announced that she had not been made, but her mother had picked her off a rose bush outside the prison door. As she said this, she was looking at the nearby rose bush, and perhaps remembering the beautiful rose bush outside the prison door she saw as she had walked to the governor's home that day. Old Roger Chillingworth, with a smile on his face, whispered something in young Mr. Dimsdale's ear. Hester Prynne looked at the doctor, and was astonished to see how much older he looked than when he was her husband. His face now looked old and ugly. They looked into each other's eyes for a moment, then she quickly looked away. "This is awful!" cried the governor, shocked at Pearl's response. "Here is a child of 3 years old, and she cannot tell me who made her. I think, gentlemen, we should take her from her mother immediately, so she will be taught about Christianity and our God who made her." Hester picked Pearl up and held her close to her chest, looking angrily at the governor.
"God gave me the child,"
cried she.
"He gave her to me because I have nothing else. Pearl is my happiness, and she is also my pain. She is the Scarlet Letter. You will not take her. I will die first."
"My poor woman," said the old minister gently, "the child shall be well cared for. much better than you can do."
"God gave her to me,"
repeated Hester Prynne, almost screaming now.
"I will not give her up."
she exclaimed before quickly turning to young Mr. Dimmesdale.
"Speak for me,"
cried she.
"You were my minister, and know me better than these men. I will not lose the child. Speak for me. You know how strong a mother's love is, and how much stronger is that love when she has only her child and her scarlet letter. I will not lose the child."
The young minister, looking pale and holding his hand over his heart, immediately began to speak. "She does speak the truth. God gave her the child, and she knows the child better than anyone else. And there is a great attachment between this mother and this child. This mother has told us honestly that this child reminds her daily of her terrible crime, which she shows in the child's clothes, looking so similar to her own scarlet letter that burns her chest. It is good for this poor criminal woman to care for her child, to continually remind her of her terrible sin, and to teach her that if she teaches her child to be a good, honest Christian, then the child will bring her mother to heaven when she dies. Here, the criminal mother is happier than the sinful father, who will not see them in heaven. We must allow God to decide Hester's punishment." "You speak, my friend, with strange honesty," said old Roger Chillingworth, smiling at him. "Indeed," answered the governor, "and you have persuaded me to agree with you." After the young minister had finished his speech, he walked to the window, hiding his face. Pearl soon walked quietly towards him, took his hand, and put it gently on her cheek. Her mother, who was looking at them, asked herself,
"Is this my Pearl?"
She had never seen such a gentle show of love from her child, yet she knew Pearl had love in her heart. The minister then put his hand on her head, stopped for a moment, then kissed her forehead sweetly. Little Pearl then laughed and ran down the hall. "A strange child," said old Roger Chillingworth. "It is easy to see her mother's part in her. Shall we guess the child's father?" "No, that would be sinful," said Mr. Wilson. "God knows who the sinning father is." Hester Prynne then left with Pearl. As they were leaving, they saw Mistress Hibbins, Governor Bellingham's bitter sister, who would be killed for being a witch a few years later.
"Will you go with us tonight to the dark forest to meet with the devil?"
she asked.
"No, I will not be going with you. I must stay at home to watch over my little Pearl. If they had taken my little Pearl from me today, then I would have gone to meet you tonight,"
Hester answered. Here we see that the young minister's argument that the child would save her mother from going to hell was true. Chapter 9. The Mysterious Roger Chillingworth. The reader must remember that Roger Chillingworth was the true husband of Hester Prynne, who had arrived in the town during Hester's public punishment on the marketplace platform, holding a small child in her arms. He decided at that moment not to claim the criminal woman as his wife, but to take another name and begin a new life. He had a new purpose, however, which was to discover the identity of Hester's mysterious lover and to cause that man great pain and suffering. He then settled in the Puritan town as Roger Chillingworth, claiming that he was a doctor who had recently come from England and was warmly invited into the town. The townspeople were delighted to have a new doctor, with great knowledge, living among them. He had been living with a group of American Indians for nearly a year before arriving in the town. During that time, he had learned a great deal about the medical use of herbs and plants, which he valued greatly as nature's cure to many illnesses. Soon after settling in the town, he chose Minister Dimmesdale as his religious leader. The townspeople considered the young minister to be nearly a guiltless angel, as he was quite popular in the community as a religious leader. Near the time when old Roger Chillingworth arrived in the town, however, Mr. Dimmesdale became quite ill. Most in town believed that the young minister worked too hard at his profession and had therefore become ill. Many declared that young Mr. Dimmesdale was dying because the world was too evil for his honest and pure soul. When old Roger Chillingworth arrived, many townspeople wondered why such an educated man would leave England for a new town in a mysterious land. People decided that heaven had sent him to care for their dear Mr. Dimmesdale. Just after his arrival in town, the old doctor became quite close to the young minister, looking quite worried about his illness. He was anxious to cure his new friend. The town's religious leaders and young women begged the minister to accept the doctor's offer of help. Mr. Dimmesdale gently declined. "I need no medicine," said he. But why did the young minister refuse? He grew more weak and pale as each week passed. Did he wish to die? The religious leaders insisted that the young minister accept the help that God has offered him. The minister listened in silence and finally promised to speak with the doctor. The old doctor soon became the medical adviser and dear friend to the young minister. These two men, one old, one young, began to spend a great deal of time together as the doctor intended to find the reason for his friend's illness, as well as to discover his friend's true character. They took long walks on the seashore or in the forest. Often, one was the guest in the other's home. The minister was interested in the doctor's thoughts, as he could discuss certain topics that he would never talk about with the other town ministers. Time went on, and the two continued to spend a great deal of time together, discussing religion, government, and personal subjects. And yet, the minister never spoke of his terrible criminal secret, which greatly disappointed the doctor. Roger Chillingworth, after some time, quietly requested to the other ministers that he move to Mr. Dimmesdale's home so he could better care for the young minister. The town was quite delighted to hear this, as everyone there worried a great deal for their ill minister. Roger Chillingworth then had chosen one of the loveliest young girls in town to marry the young minister. Still, Arthur Dimmesdale refused to marry. The old doctor was always near the minister to care for him with gentle concern. The townspeople viewed Roger Chillingworth as a caring doctor who God had sent to take care of their dear minister, who suffered greatly. No one in town spoke badly about the mysterious doctor. Although one gentleman of the town who had come from London many years ago swore that he had seen the doctor nearly 30 years ago with a different name in London where he was involved with a murder. The other townspeople did not pay attention to this story, however. Many noticed that he had changed considerably since being in town, particularly after moving in with Mr. Dimmesdale. At first, he had been calm and patient, but after time his face became ugly and evil. After a great while, many believed that the young minister was being visited by the devil, who called himself Roger Chillingworth. The people hoped that the minister would win over the evil doctor, but when they looked at the sick minister, so pale and thin, they worried that he may lose his battle with the devil. Chapter 10. The Doctor and His Patient. Old Roger Chillingworth, throughout life, had been calm, kind, and honest, although never quite friendly. When he first came to the town and declared that he would discover the identity of Hester's lover, he began his research, desiring only to find out the truth. As he continued, however, he became more interested in the young minister, looking deep into the minister's heart to find out his secrets, although he grew rather impatient when the minister continued to deny him of his deepest secret of being Pearl's father. At times, however, the young minister would have suspicions about the true qualities of the mysterious doctor. The minister would look at his doctor friend with shocked and confused eyes, not knowing where his suspicions had come from. Mr. Dimmesdale had an honest heart, and believed that all others were honest as well. Therefore, he rejected his suspicions and continued to treat the doctor as his dear friend, refusing to recognize him as his worst enemy. One day, the minister was talking with the old doctor as he was arranging some unpleasant herbs. "Where," asked the minister with a look of suspicion, "did you gather those dark, strange-looking herbs?" "I discovered them in the graveyard nearby," answered the doctor, continuing his work. "They are new to me. I found them growing on a tombstone with no name, or anything else to remember the dead man aside from these ugly weeds. Perhaps these weeds represent a terrible secret he had, the ugliness in his heart, which grew after his death. Possibly, if he had admitted his secret while still alive, then these ugly plants would not have grown on his tombstone." "Perhaps," said Mr. Dimmesdale, "he honestly desired to admit his secret, but could not." "Why?" asked the doctor. "Since nature and God ask for us all to admit our mistakes, why then have these terrible black weeds grown on this man's tombstone? They have grown to represent the man's unspoken crime." "That, sir, is your imagination," replied the minister. "The only judge we all shall have to decide our guilt is God. He makes such decisions at our deaths, not through growing weeds on a tombstone. And I believe that any man with such a terrible secret will admit it on the last day of his life, not with fear, but with joy." "Then why not admit the secrets here?" asked Roger Chillingworth, looking quietly at the minister. "Why should the guilty ones not declare their mistakes sooner, rather than immediately before their death?" "Most do," said the minister, putting his hand to his heart as if feeling a strong pain there. "Many, many people have told me their terrible secret crimes, and have felt great relief after. Others, however, after keeping their secret for a great while, feel relieved when they admit their sins just before their death. Yet some men keep their secrets hidden," observed the calm doctor. "True, there are such men," answered Mr. Dimmesdale. "It is possible, however, that they still respect God and are eager to continue on earth. Perhaps these criminals do not want to present themselves as evil and dirty to the good humans that God has created, because these criminals will not improve the world by admitting their crimes, as the sins have already happened. Instead, they keep the secret hidden, which gives them great guilt and suffering, although they may look like good, honest people." "These men are cheating themselves," said Roger Chillingworth. "These men fear the guilt and shame they should feel. Such men should not feel love for God and honest humans, while also feeling shame and guilt for their sins." "Are you telling me that a criminal man who decided to keep his secrets hidden can help his fellow men more than God's own truth? Believe me, such men are cheating themselves." "Perhaps you are right," said the young minister. "But now, do you believe that my health has improved with your excellent skills as a doctor?" Before Roger Chillingworth could answer, they heard the wild laughter of a young child's voice coming from the nearby burial ground. The minister then looked out the window to see Hester Prynne and little Pearl passing by. Pearl looked beautiful, but was acting wild at that time, as she often did. Roger Chillingworth then went to the window and smiled cleverly as he spoke. "That child has no respect for the laws of right and wrong," he said. "What is she? Is she completely evil? Can she love? I do not know if she is a good human or not," answered Mr. Dimmesdale quietly. The child probably heard them speaking as she looked up to the window with a naughty smile. She threw a leaf at the minister. Just then Hester looked up, and these 4 people, old and young, looked at each other in silence. The child then laughed loudly before she spoke to her mother.
"Come away, mother. Come away, or that old black man will catch you. He has already caught the minister. Come away, mother, or he will catch you." "But he cannot catch little Pearl,"
she declared as she took her mother away, dancing as she went. "There goes a woman," continued Roger Chillingworth after a pause, "who has committed a terrible crime, but does not hide her crime. Do you believe Hester Prynne is less miserable because her scarlet letter is on her chest and not hidden from the world?" "I do believe it," answered the minister, "but I cannot answer for her. There was a look of pain in her face, which I wish I had not seen. But still, I think people suffer less when they are able to show their pain, as Hester Prynne does, rather than hide their pain and guilt." There was another pause before the doctor spoke. "You asked me a short time ago if my help as a doctor has improved your suffering health." "I did," answered the minister, "and I would like to hear your opinion. Please speak honestly." "Well," said the doctor, still arranging his plants, "your illness is quite strange to me, and I still do not know the cause of it," he said before a pause. "Now, please tell me honestly, my young friend, have you told me all your health problems?" "Yes, of course I have." "You have lived with me for months. You know a great deal about my health," exclaimed the minister. "You tell me, then, that I know everything," said Roger Chillingworth, looking carefully at his patient. "Oftentimes, when we become ill, something in our spirit causes our illness. I speak honestly because you are my dear friend. So, I will ask you, is there something in your spirit that makes you ill?" "You know nothing about medicine of the spirit," the minister said quickly before standing up to leave. "A sickness in your spirit," continued the doctor, "has caused your body to become sick as well. I am unable to cure your body if you do not first cure the illness in your spirit." "No, not you, not a doctor of the body," cried Mr. Dimmesdale, turning to the old doctor angrily. "Not you. If my spirit is indeed ill, then I will ask the doctor of my spirit, God, to cure me. He, if he wishes to, will cure me, or he can kill. He will decide. But who are you? Who puts himself between the sufferer and his God?" exclaimed the minister before rushing out of the room. "I am pleased we have discussed this," said Roger Chillingworth to himself, watching the minister with a clever smile. "We shall be friends again soon. The honest Mr. Dimmesdale has great passion in his heart that has greatly upset him." After a few hours alone, the disturbed minister calmed himself and apologized a great number of times to the kind doctor. The young minister was quite confused as to why he became so upset when the doctor offered his advice, which he had asked for. Old Roger Chillingworth continued as the young minister's medical doctor. They spent many hours together each day, but at the end of each visit, the old doctor would leave with a clever smile on his face, although Mr. Dimmesdale never noticed his friend's smile. "A rare patient," the old doctor whispered. "I must still research this young man, as there is a strange connection between his body and spirit. I will discover the reason for his illness." Chapter 11. The Inside of a Heart. The last incident, in which the minister became quite angry about the doctor's impolite questions, greatly cooled the relationship between the two. Although they continued their friendly conversations in the same manner as before, the doctor was delighted that he had seen his patient's terrible suffering, while his patient trusted his friendly doctor much less than previously. The doctor continued to look quite calm and gentle, but he had changed considerably. He was now more excited to see his patient suffer than before, after seeing the pain he had caused in their last conversation, in which the minister became greatly upset and left the room in anger. The doctor's efforts to befriend the young minister and to provide medical care, as well as honest friendship, were lies. He had made himself the one trusted friend to the minister, but only to see his young friend suffer terribly. The minister, being quite a shy and sensitive man, would not allow himself to admit his terrible sin to his close doctor friend. Roger Chillingworth, however, became more eager for the disturbed minister to admit his secret after their last meeting. He had previously just been an observer of the young minister's pain and suffering, but he was now an actor, pretending to be the minister's dear friend, while worsening the man's pain and guilt. The doctor knew quite well how to hurt the minister with his comments about sin, suffering, and guilt. He often saw the minister put his hand to his heart after the doctor had made one such comment. The doctor would then smile with satisfaction. While all this happened, the minister never fully understood the secret plans of the doctor, although the young man never trusted his close friend. He often looked at him with fearful doubt, sometimes even with horror and bitter hatred. Mr. Dimmesdale at times hated the sight of his old doctor friend, although he did not know the reason for these strong feelings. Aside from his guilt for his evil sin, he felt guilt as well for having such a terrible opinion of his doctor friend, thinking he had no reason to feel such hate. Although the minister suffered greatly from illness and guilt, in part because his dear friend, Roger Chillingworth, continually reminded him of his terrible sin, the minister, Mr. Dimmesdale, was quite popular in the community. The townspeople respected him for his suffering, although they did not know the terrible reason for his pain. Although the older ministers in town were still quite respected as the true religious leaders of the community, still the townspeople regarded the young minister as a gift from God, a gentle, kind man of human perfection. The young girls would grow nervous and pale when he spoke to them, most of whom were passionately in love with the young minister. The older men in the town, who were quite brave and strong, believed the weak young minister would go to heaven before them, and told their children that they wished to be buried near the minister's holy tomb. And all this time poor Mr. Dimmesdale was thinking of his tomb, wondering if the grass would grow on it, although he was secretly a terrible sinner. It is unbelievable the pain that this popularity within the town caused the minister. He loved and respected the truth. He often wished to declare his secret to the people of the town as he spoke to them on Sunday mornings in the church. "I, your minister, whom you trust and respect, am a lie. More than once Mr. Dimmesdale had gone to his platform at the church on Sunday mornings, with a purpose never to come down until he had told the community about his terrible sin. More than once, more than 100 times, he had this purpose. He had, indeed, told the people that he was altogether evil, more evil than the worst of sinners. He told the people these words, but they did not tear him down from the platform to punish him with death, as they should have. Instead, they only respected him more. And yet, he loved the truth and hated the lie more than most others in this world. Yet, he could not explain his sin to the people. Therefore, more than all other things, he hated himself. The guilt he felt forced him to make himself suffer more. In Mr. Dimmesdale's secret closet, closed and locked, there was a bloody whip, which he would use to beat himself as a punishment for his terrible crime. Oftentimes, this Puritan minister would beat himself with the whip on his own shoulders, then laugh bitterly, but would then beat himself more as punishment for laughing. It was his custom, too, to fast, or refuse to eat for a number of days. Other Puritan ministers fasted to clean their body, as a way to show respect to God. The young, troubled minister, however, fasted for great lengths of time until he was too weak to walk. He did this as a punishment for himself. He stayed awake for many nights to remind himself of his sinful crime. Sometimes he would sit the whole night in darkness. Other times he would sit with a nearby lamp, staring at himself in the mirror. During these long nights, he would often imagine seeing people from his life. At times he would see his parents, staring at him with shameful anger for his secret crime. Most times he would see Hester Prynne, walking with little Pearl in her scarlet clothing. Hester would first point her finger toward the scarlet letter on her chest, then to the minister's own chest. Although he knew he was imagining Hester Prynne and little Pearl pointing to his chest, he felt that these images were more real in his life than most other things. The only truth that continued to give Mr. Dimmesdale a real existence on this earth was the pain and suffering of his heart. On one of those terrible nights, during which he punished himself with refusing to sleep, he had an incredible thought. He jumped to his feet and dressed himself carefully before he walked quietly downstairs and out the door. Chapter 12. The Minister's Thought. Walking in the shadow of the night, the young minister went to the platform where 7 years ago Hester Prynne stood for her shameful public punishment after being in prison, holding her young child in her arms. The minister went up the steps to stand on the platform. It was a dark night in early May. The sky was covered with gray clouds. There was no fear of being discovered on the platform, as he was the only one awake in the town. He could have stood there until morning, as no one in town would wake for many hours. Why, then, had he gone there? Was it to disrespect forgiveness? Disrespect, indeed, but which his soul had trouble with. He had gone there because he felt a great amount of regret and guilt which he felt everywhere. He believed he would not feel his anxious worries and guilt on that platform where his partner in his crime had suffered so greatly. Poor, miserable man! He was too weak for crime. Only strong-minded men may be involved in crime. This weak and sensitive man could only feel guilt. And thus, while standing on the platform, in this meaningless attempt at admitting his crime, he suddenly felt a great horror, afraid that the world was now able to see the guilty scarlet letter burning on his chest. On his heart, indeed, he felt a great deal of pain from his guilt. He then screamed aloud in horror. "It is done!" whispered the minister, covering his face with his hands. The whole town will awake and hurry to find me here." But it was not so. The scream had shocked him, but had not awoken the townspeople. The minister then uncovered his eyes and looked around him. At one of the windows of Governor Bellingham's home he saw the old governor himself with a lamp in his hand. He looked like a ghost walking through the streets. The scream had shocked him. At another window of the same house appeared old Mistress Hibbins, the governor's sister, also with a lamp. She looked anxiously outside. This witch woman had heard Mr. Dimmesdale scream and believed it was the devil calling to her. She then noticed the governor's lamp, and she quickly went back to her room. The governor continued to look around him for a short time before returning to his home. The minister grew calm. He soon noticed, however, a light that was coming toward him. As the light came closer to him, he saw another minister, Mr. Wilson, who had been praying at the bedside of some dying man. The old minister had just come from the home of Governor Winthrop, who had just died. "Good evening to you, respected Minister Wilson. Come up on the platform and stay here with me an hour." Had Mr. Dimmesdale actually spoken? For one instant he believed that he had spoken, but he had not. Minister Wilson continued to step slowly onward, looking careful at the muddy pathway before him, and never once turned his head towards the guilty platform. The young minister continued to stand quietly on the platform. Morning would soon arrive, and the neighborhood would soon find him there on the guilty platform. Who would they find standing on the platform with a guilty look of shame? Who but the minister Arthur Dimmesdale, half frozen to death, and standing where Hester Prynne had stood. Thinking about the horror of this idea, the minister, unaware of anyone else around him, began laughing aloud. His laughter was responded to by a childish laugh. He recognized the laugh of little Pearl. "Pearl? Little Pearl?" cried he, after a moment's pause. Then, whispering, "Hester? Hester Prynne? Are you there?"
"Yes, it is Hester Prynne,"
she replied in surprise. The minister then heard her come near.
"It is I and my little Pearl."
"Where have you come from, Hester?" asked the minister.
"I have been with Governor Winthrop, and have measured him for his funeral clothing, and am now going home."
"Come up here, Hester and little Pearl," said the minister, Mr. Dimmesdale. "You have both been here before, but I was not with you. Come up here once again, and we will stand all three together." She silently walked up the steps and stood on the platform, holding little Pearl by the hand. The minister then gently held on to the child's other hand. He immediately felt a great connection with the two. The three formed an electric chain.
"Minister,"
whispered little Pearl. "Yes, child?" asked Mr. Dimmesdale.
"Will you stand here with Mother and me tomorrow at noon?"
asked Pearl. "No, my little Pearl," answered the minister, as his courage to speak the truth had left him, and he no longer wished to admit his terrible secret. "No, my child. I shall, indeed, stand with you and your mother on another day, but not tomorrow." Pearl laughed and attempted to pull away her hand, but the minister held it tightly. "A moment longer, my child," said he.
"But do you promise?"
asked Pearl.
"To take my hand and Mother's hand tomorrow at noon?"
"Not tomorrow at noon, Pearl," said the minister, "but another time."
"And what other time?"
insisted the child. at the great judgment day, when we are all three in heaven and stand together before God," whispered the minister. "Then we will stand together, but we shall not stand together in the sunlight of this world." Pearl laughed again. But before Mr. Dimmesdale had finished speaking, a strange red night-light beamed from the sky, and there stood the minister with his hand over his heart, and Hester Prynne with the Scarlet Letter flashing on her chest, and little Pearl, herself a Scarlet Letter, and the connection between those two. They stood in the noon of that strange light, as if it were the light to tell all secrets. There was mystery in the little Pearl's eyes and her face, as she looked up at the minister, had a naughty smile which made her look quite strange. She took her hand from Mr. Dimmesdale's and pointed across the street, but he put both his hands over his chest and looked toward the sky. All the time that he looked upward at the sky, he saw that little Pearl was pointing her finger towards old Roger Chillingworth, who stood nearby. The minister appeared to see him, but was astonished by the light in the sky. The doctor was not careful then, as at all other times, to hide the hatred in his face. "Who is that man, Hester?" whispered Mr. Dimmesdale, terrified. "I fear him. Do you know that man? I hate him, Hester." She remembered her promise to her former husband to never admit that they were once married, and was silent. "My soul is in terror looking at him," whispered the minister again. "Who is he? Who is he? Can you not tell me? I am horrified when I see this man, but I do not know why."
"Minister,"
said little Pearl,
"I can tell you who he is."
"Quickly then, child," said the minister. "Quickly, but whisper." Pearl whispered something into his ear that sounded like a human language, indeed, but was simply childish language that he could not understand. The strange child then laughed aloud. "Are you laughing at me now?" asked the minister.
"You were not bold and courageous. You were not true,"
answered the child.
"You would not promise to take my hand and mother's hand tomorrow at noon."
"Sir," answered the doctor, who had walked near the platform, "Mr. Dimmesdale, is that you? Well, well, indeed. Come, good sir, and my dear friend, let me take you home." "How did you know that I was here?" asked the minister fearfully. "Truly, I did not know you were here," answered Roger Chillingworth. "I had been with Governor Winthrop, assisting him as a doctor that I am. Now come with me, minister." "I will go home with you," said Mr. Dimmesdale. He then allowed the old doctor to take him away. The next day, however, being Sunday, he gave a speech to the church, which was the most powerful he had ever given. But as he came down after his speech, one of the old respected ministers was there, holding Mr. Dimmesdale's glove. "It was found," said the old minister, "this morning on the platform where the evildoers are sent for public shame. The devil put it there. But indeed the devil was blind and foolish, and should know that a pure hand does not need a glove to cover it." "Thank you, my good friend," said the minister quietly, but rather shocked. "Yes, it seems to be my glove indeed." "And since the devil stole it, you should no longer wear gloves, as your spirit is pure enough to handle him with no gloves," said the old minister, smiling. "But did you hear of the great red letter in the sky last night? The letter A, which we believe to stand for angel. For as our good Governor Winthrop was made an angel last night when he died." "No," answered the minister. "I had not heard of it." Chapter 13. Another View of Hester. In her one interview with Mr. Dimmesdale, Hester Prynne was shocked at his weak condition, as he could hardly stand after observing his enemy, Roger Chillingworth. With her knowledge of the true relationship between Roger Chillingworth and Arthur Dimmesdale, she knew that aside from the minister's own feelings of guilt, the old doctor had greatly added to the poor minister's suffering and pain. Knowing how strong and brave this young man once was, she decided that she must explain the true identity of the mysterious Roger Chillingworth. Thinking of the terror with which he had begged her, the criminal woman, for support against his enemy. Hester Prynne was no longer the same woman of 7 years ago, standing on a platform before the town, frightened with a child in her arms. Pearl was now 7 years old. Her mother, with the Scarlet Letter on her chest, had become familiar with the townspeople. Hester Prynne never quarreled with the public, but obeyed uncomplainingly. She never asked for more than enough to take care of little Pearl and herself. The rest she spent on clothing and food for others with less money than she had, although she never received any thanks from those she supported. Still, she continued her work tirelessly. The letter on her chest represented her work on earth, always helping others without expecting any thanks. Many people refused to see the scarlet A by its first meaning, and said that it meant able. So strong was Hester Prynne with a woman's strength. If she passed someone in town, she never raised her head to greet them. If they greeted her, she laid her finger on the Scarlet Letter and walked by. The rulers of the town, as well as the religious leaders, took longer to speak fondly of Hester's good qualities than the people. However, they did eventually agree to the town's declaration of her being forgiven. The townspeople looked at the Scarlet Letter not as representing her sin, but rather as representing her good deeds. "Do you see that woman in the Scarlet Letter?" they would say to strangers. "It is our Hester, the town's own Hester, who is so kind to the poor and so helpful to the sick." The effect of the Scarlet Letter, or rather of her societal position within the community, had been great. All the beauty she had previously had was now faded, as was the poor clothing she wore under her bright Scarlet Letter. Her rich black hair had been cut off or was completely hidden by a cap. When a woman has lived through a difficult experience, her character changes a great deal. If she be all tenderness, she will die. If she survive, the tenderness will leave her. Much of the coldness of Hester's character was because her life had turned from great passion and feeling to thought, as she was no longer allowed to express her great feelings after she was punished by society. The world's laws were no longer the laws of Hester Prynne. Upon having her child, Hester became more calm and thoughtful. In the education of her child, the mother's joy of thought had begun. Everything was against her. The world was unfriendly. The child's own wild nature continually reminded the mother that she was born out of a crime of passion. Hester often asked herself, in the bitterness of her heart, whether it was for good or evil that the poor girl was born. Indeed, she often thought about the role of women in society. She long ago decided that the whole system of society must be destroyed and built again. Then, men's role in society must change considerably before women can be allowed to have a fair and suitable position. Of course, these problems will never be fixed, Hester has realized. At times she wondered in fear if she should have rather sent Pearl immediately to heaven and die herself as well. The punishment of the Scarlet Letter had not served its purpose. Now, however, Her night meeting with the minister, Mr. Dimmesdale, had given her a new purpose. She had seen the terrible misery in which the minister struggled. She saw that he would soon go mad if he had not already become so. The secret enemy always by his side, pretending to be the closest friend and helper, had ruined the poor minister. Hester felt guilty for leaving the weak minister with the evil doctor, with no wisdom about his reasons for befriending the young minister. Since their conversation in the prison after the old doctor had arrived in town, Hester realized that her position in society had risen greatly, while his had declined terribly. Hester then decided that she must meet with her former husband, and to attempt to rescue his victim from ruin. One afternoon, walking with Pearl near the seashore, she saw the old doctor looking for herbs and plants to use as medicine. Chapter 14. Hester and the Doctor. Hester told little Pearl to run down to the water to play while she talked a while with the doctor. So the child ran quickly away to the sea. She often stopped along the way to look at her reflection in the small pools of water that gathered. Upon looking into the pools, she saw a little girl with curly dark hair smiling at her. Not realizing that it was her reflection, she would invite the child to join her at the seashore. Meanwhile, her mother went to see the doctor.
"I would like to speak with you,"
said she.
"Something that concerns us both a great deal."
"Ah, and is it Mistress Hester that would like to speak to old Roger Chillingworth?" answered he, looking up. "You should know, Mistress Hester, that I was recently speaking with the governor about you. We were discussing your Scarlet Letter, and agreeing that, perhaps, the letter should be now removed from your chest. I requested that the town rulers decide that you should be allowed to remove the Scarlet Letter, and quickly."
"The town rulers do not have the decision,"
calmly replied Hester.
"If my punishment was over, the letter would fall off my chest. It would not be removed."
"Well, then, wear it, if it suits you," responded the doctor as he touched the Scarlet Letter on her chest. All this while Hester had been looking at the old man, and was shocked to see how old he had become in the past 7 years. He did not just look older, but his previous calm and quiet character was gone. He now looked nervously angry. Roger Chillingworth was a man who decided to become a devil. This unhappy person had changed so greatly by spending 7 years in finding his only enjoyment through discovering ways to harming his enemy. The Scarlet Letter burned Hester Prynne's chest. She, too, felt guilt for the doctor's great suffering. "What do you see in my face?" asked the doctor, "that you look at so carefully?"
"Something that would make me cry. If there were any tears left in me, I would cry for your poor victim,"
answered she. "Is that why you wish to speak to me about him?" cried Roger Chillingworth, eagerly, quite delighted to discuss the topic. "I had just been thinking of that gentleman, so please speak."
"When we last spoke together,"
said Hester,
"now 7 years ago, it was your desire to keep our marriage a secret from the town. I had terrible doubts about not explaining your relationship to me to Mr. Dimmesdale, but was silent because I had sworn to you that I would not tell our secret. However, since that day, no other man has been so near to him as you. You are beside him while he sleeps and while he is awake. You search deep in his heart. You cause him to die each day. In permitting this, I have acted terribly towards him."
"What choice did you have?" asked Roger Chillingworth. "If I had declared him to be your child's father, he would have been killed immediately.
It would have been better so,
said Hester Prynne. What evil have I done to this man? Asked Roger Chillingworth again. I have cared for him with great attention. Without my help, the man would have died after 2 years, given his weak mind and body. I have wasted my skills on him.
It would have been better that he died immediately,
said Hester Prynne. Yes, woman, you speak the truth, cried old Roger Chillingworth angrily. Better had he died immediately. He suffered more than any other man, and all in sight of his worst enemy. He has known me. He knew I was never a true friend.
Haven't you harmed him enough?
Said Hester. No, never, answered the doctor with great passion. Do you remember me, Hester, as I was 9 years ago? Even then I was old, but my life was honest and quiet. I was always faithfully interested in knowledge and my studies. I was peaceful, kind, and fair.
Yes, you were just that,
said Hester. And what am I now? Demanded he, looking into her face and permitting her to see the evil within him. I am evil, and who has made me this way?
It was myself,
cried Hester.
It was I, not him. Why have you punished him and not me?
I have let the Scarlet Letter punish you, replied Roger Chillingworth. If that has not punished you, then I can do no more, he said as he put his fingers on the letter, smiling.
This Scarlet Letter has punished you,
answered Hester Prynne.
And now I must admit the secret to Mr. Dimmesdale. He must see your true self as his enemy.
Woman, I could almost pity you, said Roger Chillingworth. I pity you, indeed. Perhaps if you had met this love before you had met with me, you would have found happiness.
And I pity you as well,
answered Hester Prynne.
As the hatred in your heart has changed you, who was once a wise and just man.
Chapter 15. Hester and Pearl. So Roger Chillingworth, an old misshapen man, with a face that frightened men's memories, left Hester Prynne and went looking for herbs again. Hester watched him for a short time, looking at his eager curiosity as he searched. She wondered what sort of herbs they were, which the old man was so careful to gather. Would the earth grow herbs faster for an evil purpose with the insistence of the old man? Or might the growth of natural herbs be harmed by the touch of his evil hand?
Whether this is a sin or not,
said Hester Prynne bitterly as she watched the old man,
I hate the man.
She scolded herself for the feeling, but could not change her opinion of him.
Yes, I hate him,
repeated Hester more bitterly than before.
He cheated me,
she said to herself, thinking of the days during their marriage. She had not been in love with him, and told him so, but he insisted that he would be an excellent husband to the young girl. Although now she realized that he had taken her only chance to find love and happiness in a husband. She had worn the Scarlet Letter for 7 long years, but never felt regret in the passionate love she discovered in the young minister. After he was gone, she called her child back to her.
Pearl, little Pearl, where are you?
Pearl, who always had a great imagination, had been amusing herself near the sea. She had been gathering seaweed to make fanciful pretend clothing for herself. At last she took the weeds and made a letter A which was green instead of scarlet.
I wonder if Mother will ask me what it means,
thought Pearl. Just then she heard her mother's voice, and she went to Hester Prynne, dancing, laughing, and pointing to the decoration on her chest.
My little Pearl,
said Hester after a moment's silence.
The green letter on a child's chest has no reason. But do you know, my child, what this letter means that your mother is forced to wear? Yes, Mother,
said the child.
It is the great letter A. You have taught me the letters of the alphabet.
Hester stared at her child for a moment before speaking.
Do you know, child, why your mother wears this letter? Yes, I do,
answered Pearl, looking brightly into her mother's face.
It is for the same reason that the minister keeps his hand over his heart. And what reason is that?
asked Hester.
No, Mother, I have told you all I know,
said Pearl, more seriously than usual.
Ask that old man you had been talking with. Perhaps he can tell you. But please, Mother, what does this scarlet letter mean? And why do you wear it on your chest? And why does the minister keep his hand over his heart?
Pearl had always shown a great interest in the scarlet letter, always on her mother's chest. Hester had believed that this child's curiosity was another punishment for her terrible crime. As the two walked home together, Pearl continued asking her mother of the mysterious letter always on her chest.
What does the letter mean, Mother? And why do you wear it? And why does the minister keep his hand over his heart? What shall I say?
thought Hester to herself.
No, I must not tell her the terrible secret of her parents. Silly Pearl,
said the mother.
There are many things in this world that a child must not ask about. What do I know of the minister's heart? And I wear the scarlet letter because I love the gold thread.
In all the 7 years since her child's birth, Hester Prynne had never lied about the scarlet letter on her chest. 2 or 3 more times during their walk home, the child again asked her mother about the scarlet letter.
Mother,
said she,
what does the scarlet letter mean?
And the next morning, the first question the little girl asked was again about the discussion from the day before.
Mother, Mother, why does the minister keep his hand over his heart? Do not speak about that, naughty child,
answered her mother bitterly. Chapter 16. A Forest Walk. Hester Prynne had remembered her promise to tell Mr. Dimmesdale of the relation between herself and the minister's close doctor friend. For several days, however, she had found no opportunity to speak to him until she found him on a walk near the sea, as he often did. She had not wanted to find him at his home, as Roger Chillingworth would surely be nearby. One day, Hester took young Pearl to walk near the seashore to find the minister.
Mother,
said little Pearl,
the sunshine does not love you. It runs away and hides from you because it is afraid of something on your chest. There is sunshine over there, but when you stand within the light, it leaves. Let me run and catch it. I am just a child. It will not run from me, for I wear nothing on my chest yet. And you never will wear anything on your chest, I hope,
said Hester.
And why not, Mother?
asked Pearl, stopping.
Won't the scarlet letter appear on my chest one day when I am a grown woman? Run away, child,
answered her mother,
and catch the sunshine. It will soon be gone.
And the child ran away to chase the sunshine. Hester watched her young child with a smile.
Come, my child,
said Hester.
we will sit down and rest." "I am not tired, Mother,"
replied the little girl.
"but you may sit down if you will tell me a story." "A story, child."
said Hester.
"And about what?" "Oh, a story about the black man,"
answered Pearl.
"how he walks through the forest and carries a big ugly book and asks everybody he meets to write their names with their own blood in his book. And then he puts a mark on their chests. Have you ever met the black man, Mother?" "And who told you this story, Pearl?"
asked her mother, recognizing the story.
"It was an old woman at the house where you watched last night,"
said the child.
"The old woman believed I was asleep while she was talking of it. She said that 1,000 people had met him to write their names in his book, and that old Mistress Hibbins was one who had signed his book. And, Mother, the old woman said that this scarlet letter was the black man's mark on you. Is it true, Mother? And do you meet him during the night?" "Did you ever wake during the night without your mother next to you?"
asked Hester.
"No."
said the child.
"If you do not fear leaving the cottage at night, I would like you to take me there. I would very gladly go. But, Mother, tell me now, is there such a black man? And did you ever meet him? And is this his mark?" "Will you stop asking me such questions if I tell you?" "Yes, if you tell me all."
answered Pearl.
"Once in my life I met the black man.
said her mother.
This scarlet letter is his mark."
They sat down together for a short time, the child amusing herself with a small stream of water nearby. Hester then saw the minister walking.
"Go and play, child."
The mother told her child.
"Yes, Mother,
answered Pearl.
but if it is the black man, will you take me away?" "Go, silly child.
said her mother impatiently.
It is no black man. You cannot see him now. It is the minister." "And so it is."
said the child.
"And, Mother, he has his hand over his heart. Is it because, when the minister wrote his name in the book, the black man marked his chest as well? But why does he not wear it outside on his clothing, as you do, Mother?" "Go now, child, but do not go far."
The child went singing away near the stream. When the strange child had left, Hester Prynne had walked closer to the minister. She saw the minister walking alone. He looked nervous and weak after so many years of quiet pain and suffering. Chapter 17. The Minister and His Follower. Slowly, as the minister walked, she went closer to him and began to speak.
"Arthur Dimmesdale,"
she said, quietly at first, then louder.
"Arthur Dimmesdale."
"Who speaks?" answered the minister. Looking around anxiously, he saw the figure of a person coming near him. He walked closer and discovered the Scarlet Letter. "Hester? Hester Prynne?" said he. "Is that you?"
"Yes."
she answered.
"And you, Arthur Dimmesdale, is that you?"
Both were rather astonished to meet, after so many years of silence and guilt. Each seemed to view the other as only a ghost, shocked to be speaking. It was with fear and slow caution that the two met. Arthur Dimmesdale, always the polite gentleman, put out his hand to greet Hester Prynne. She held the hand, surprised at how cold and thin it had become. After touching hands, they now felt at ease, both alive on earth together again. Without a word more spoken, neither he nor she had the courage to speak. They walked deeper into the woods. After a while, the minister looked at Hester Prynne carefully. "Hester," said he. "Have you found peace?" She smiled sadly, looking down at her chest.
"Have you?"
she asked. "None. Nothing but hopelessness," he answered. "What else could I look for, being a weak liar? If I did not believe in God, perhaps I could have found peace. But I am here to suffer for my great crime. Hester, I am most miserable."
"The townspeople love and respect you,
said Hester.
and surely you do good things for them. Does that not comfort you?"
"More misery, Hester, only more misery," answered the minister with a bitter smile. "I have no faith in the good work I do. It is all a lie, because I am a lie and a terrible sinner. How can a ruined man like me help the souls of others? If the people of this town knew the truth about me, their respect and love would quickly become angry hate. I have laughed bitterly about the difference between what I seem to be to others and what I truly am. And the devil laughs at it as well."
"You wrong yourself in this.
said Hester gently.
You have deeply regretted your crime. Your sin has been forgiven for quite some time. Why should your regret not bring you peace?"
"No, Hester, no," replied the minister. "There is no forgiveness for me. I should have long ago declared my terrible sin. You must be happy, Hester Prynne, who wears the Scarlet Letter openly on your chest. Mine burns my chest in secret. If I had one friend or one enemy to declare my sins to, my soul may be alive. But I have kept this secret for 7 years, and now am near death." Hester Prynne looked into his face, but hesitated to speak. Yet, as he spoke such honest words, she knew she must tell him Roger Chillingworth's terrible secret.
"You say you wish to have a friend to cry over your sin to,"
Hester began.
"I will be that friend to you, as I was the partner of your sin."
Again she hesitated, but spoke again.
"You have had a great enemy near you, who lives with you."
The minister looked at her in horror, unable to breathe. "What do you mean?" cried he. "An enemy? And in my own home? What do you mean?" Hester Prynne now understood the terrible harm he had suffered, which she was responsible for. She now did not doubt that Roger Chillingworth had been the reason for the minister's great suffering. She had ruined this good man, and knew that she must speak about it.
"Oh, Arthur,"
cried she,
"forgive me. I have tried to be honest in everything else, but I have cheated you in this matter. I thought I was saving you from a criminal death. But a lie is never good, even though death may come otherwise. That old man, the doctor, he who calls himself Roger Chillingworth, he was my husband."
The minister looked at her for an instant with passion, but then with great anger and confusion. She then saw the terrible pain he had suffered for the past 7 years. "I should have known it," he whispered. "I did know it. I have always hated looking at the old misshapen man. Why did I not understand? Oh, Hester Prynne, this is shameful. This terrible event is your fault, woman. I cannot forgive you."
"You must forgive me,"
cried Hester.
"Let God punish. You shall forgive."
With sudden tenderness she threw her arms around him and put his head against her chest. She would not let him go until he agreed to forgive her. The rest of the world had blamed her for 7 long years, and she had never complained. But the anger of this pale, weak, sinful, and sad man was what Hester could not bear.
"Will you forgive me?"
she repeated over and over again.
Will you forgive?
I do forgive you, Hester, replied the minister after a long silence. I will forgive you now. May God forgive us both. We are not, Hester, the worst sinners in the world. There is one worse than us. That old man's desire to continually harm my spirit is a worse sin than mine.
Yes,
whispered Hester.
we had a promise to each other and will meet again in heaven. Have you forgotten?
No, Hester, said Arthur Dimmesdale, standing up. No, I have not forgotten. They sat down again, side by side, holding hands in silent sadness. Hester, cried he after a short time, here is a new horror. Roger Chillingworth knows your purpose to tell me of his true character. Will he continue, then, to keep our secret? What will he now do to harm us?
There is a strange secrecy in his nature,
replied Hester thoughtfully.
I believe he will not tell our secret.
And I? How am I to live with him any longer? Exclaimed Arthur Dimmesdale, putting his hand to his heart nervously. Think for me, Hester. You are strong.
You must no longer live with this man,
said Hester slowly. But how can I avoid living with him? Perhaps I must die here in order to escape him.
Will you die of weakness? There is no other cause.
Be strong for me, answered he. Advise me on what to do.
Is this the only place to live on earth? Perhaps we three could leave together for a new life without Roger Chillingworth.
Yes, Hester, replied the minister with a sad smile. After a moment he spoke again. It cannot be. I am powerless to go, being a weak sinner. My soul is now lost. I must not leave here.
You have suffered for 7 long years, but will no longer suffer. Leave this ruined place. Begin a new life.
Oh, Hester, cried Arthur Dimmesdale, I must die here. I have no more strength or courage to leave.
You will not go alone,
answered she in a deep whisper.
We shall all 3 go.
Then all was spoken and decided. Chapter 18. A Flood of Sunshine. Arthur Dimmesdale looked into Hester's face with a look of hope and joy, but both felt fear in their hearts. He was shocked at her bold suggestion of leaving the town together with their child, which he had hoped she would speak of, but was rather surprised to hear the words. But Hester, always with a mind of courage, was separate from society, and no longer feared society's punishments. She had been alone with her child for so long, with little communication with anyone but her child. She was now free from society's laws. The Scarlet Letter had allowed her to go where other women would not go. Shame, hopelessness, loneliness, these had been her teachers, serious and wild ones, and they had made her strong, but taught her nothing about the rules of society. The minister, however, had never gone through an experience to take him away from the common laws of society, although he often feared that he had broken the most holy of all rules. But this had been a sin of passion and love, not a crime that would harm others. Since committing that terrible crime, the young minister carefully guarded his emotions and every thought. He was one of the most important ministers in town, and was trapped in the laws of the church by its strictness. As a man who had once sinned, but who punished himself terribly for committing that sin, he was much less likely to commit another crime after feeling such guilt for his first. Thus, we seem to see that, regarding Hester Prynne, The whole 7 years of her punishment and ill fame were preparation for this meeting in the forest with her former lover. But Arthur Dimmesdale, he suffered not only for the guilt he felt for committing his crime of passion, but also for continuing as a trusted minister of the community. He was still an adviser to the townspeople about their sins when he had committed one of the worst sins possible. Now, however, he had a chance to leave his 7 years of pain and guilt to begin a new life. The minister then decided to leave, and not alone. "If in all these past 7 years," thought he, "I could remember one instant of peace or hope, I would continue this life of misery, to remain here with my pain and suffering as a punishment for my crime. But now, since I am ruined, why should I not take this peaceful opportunity before I die to suffer in hell for my sin? Or, if this is the path to a better life, as Hester tells me, I surely would choose this, to be with the woman I love and our child. I could not live without her as my companion. So powerful is she to continue so bravely, so tender to comfort me."
"You will go,"
said Hester calmly as he looked at her. When the decision was made, the young minister felt like a prisoner who had just escaped his punishment, free to return to the world. "I feel joy again," cried he. "I thought my soul had died long ago. Oh, Hester, you are my angel. You have saved me from my suffering. This is already the better life. Why did we not find it sooner?" She then removed the scarlet letter from her chest and threw it on the ground. She then breathed deeply as her suffering left her spirit, after so many years of frightful pain. She put her hand to her cap and gently removed it from her head, showing her long, dark hair, hidden under the cap for so long. She looked up into the minister's eyes with a bright smile and pink cheeks, which were usually rather pale. Her hopeful youth and beauty returned to her from the past. All at once the sunshine returned to them, and all around them was alive and bright. The nature of the forest, with no human laws to punish them with, welcomed the two lovers with happiness. Hester looked at him again with joy.
"You must know Pearl,"
said she.
"Our little Pearl. You have seen her, yes, but you will see her now as your daughter. She is a strange child. I hardly understand her. But you will love her dearly, as I do, and will advise me in how to deal with her."
"Do you think the child will be glad to know me?" asked the minister, looking worried. "I have never known children well. They seem to distrust me. I have even been afraid of little Pearl."
"That was sad,"
answered the mother.
"but she will love you dearly, and you her. She is not far away. I will call her. Pearl, Pearl."
"I see the child," observed the minister. "There she is, standing in the sunshine. So you think the child will love me?" Hester smiled and again called to Pearl, who was some distance away. She came slowly after hearing her mother's voice, slowly as she saw the minister. Chapter 19. The Child at the Stream.
"You will love her dearly,"
repeated Hester Prynne as she and the minister sat watching little Pearl.
"Do you think she is beautiful? She is so natural and calm here in the forest. She is a wonderful child, but I know she can be difficult."
"Do you know, Hester," said Arthur Dimmesdale with a smile, "that this dear child has caused me a great deal of worry. I thought, Hester, that the townspeople would surely see my face in hers, as she looks quite like her father. But she is mostly yours."
No, not mostly.
answered the mother with a tender smile.
A little longer, and you will no longer be afraid. But how strangely beautiful she looks here among nature.
It was a feeling that neither one of them had ever before experienced, that they sat and watched Pearl walk slowly to them. They could see each other in the young girl. Pearl represented the love between them, hidden for so long.
She must not see anything strange, no passion nor eagerness, in the way you speak to her,
whispered Hester.
She becomes quite upset with strong emotions if she does not understand where they are from. But the child has strong emotions. She loves me and will love you.
You cannot think, said the minister, how I fear this meeting with our child. Children do not usually like me. I frighten most young ones. By this time Pearl had almost reached them, but stopped, as she looked silently at Hester and the minister, who still sat together, waiting for her to meet them.
Come, dearest child,
said Hester encouragingly, and stretched out both her arms.
Why are you walking so slowly? Here is a friend of mine, who must be your friend also. You will have twice as much love.
Pearl, without responding to these sweet words, remained across the stream from Hester and the minister. As young Pearl stared at them both in silence, the minister put his hand to his heart, as he usually did when he was nervous. Pearl then pointed to her mother's chest before pointing to the Scarlet Letter sitting nearby.
You strange child, why do you not come to me?
Exclaimed Hester. Pearl still pointed at her mother's chest in silence. The child then became angry, as she had never before seen her mother's chest without the Scarlet Letter.
Hurry, Pearl, or I shall be angry with you,
cried Hester Prynne, who was now quite anxious for the child to come to her.
Come quickly across the stream, naughty child, and run here, or I must come to you.
But Pearl did not hear her mother's angry words, and began screaming and crying. She continued to point her finger at her mother's chest.
I see why the child is upset,
whispered Hester to the minister, turning pale as she spoke.
Children do not like change. Pearl does not see me wearing the Scarlet Letter.
Please, if you know how to calm the child, please do, if you love me, responded the minister. Hester turned again towards Pearl with an anxious look.
Pearl,
said she sadly,
look down at your feet. There is the Scarlet Letter. Pick up the Scarlet Letter and bring it to me.
The child then looked to her feet as she spoke.
Come and take it,
the child said angrily.
You naughty child,
observed Hester quietly.
I have much to tell you about her. But she is right. I must wear this punishment for a bit longer, only a few days longer, until we shall leave this place forever.
She then walked across the stream to pick up the Scarlet Letter and replace it on her chest. As she put the letter on her chest, all the youthful beauty and hope she had was gone. She then put out her hand to Pearl.
Do you know your mother now, child?
asked she.
Will you now come across the stream with your own mother, now that she has put the shame back on herself, now that she is sad? Yes, now I will,
answered the child, jumping across the stream and holding Hester's arm tightly.
Now you are my mother indeed, and I am your little Pearl. The minister is here. He wants to greet you, little Pearl,
the mother said to her child.
He loves you, my little Pearl, and loves your mother too. Will you not love him? He wishes to meet you. Does he love us?
asked Pearl, looking up into her mother's face.
Will he go back with us, hand in hand, we three together, into the town? Not now, dear child,
answered Hester.
But in a few days, he will walk hand in hand with us. We will have a home of our own together. He will teach you many things and love you dearly. You will love him, will you not? And will he always keep his hand over his heart?
asked Pearl.
Foolish child, what a question is that?
Exclaimed her mother.
Come and see him.
But perhaps because of envy or childish behavior, Pearl would not warmly greet the minister. The minister, painfully embarrassed, but hoping that a kiss on her forehead might calm the child, he bent his head down to kiss her. Pearl then ran to the stream of water to wash off the kiss from the mysterious minister. Soon after, this interview was over, and they parted with great feelings of hope. Chapter 20. The Minister in Confusion. As the minister departed, ahead of Hester Prynne and little Pearl, he looked back at them to assure himself that his meeting with them was indeed real. But there was Hester, wearing her gray dress, still standing in the forest next to their little Pearl, dancing and smiling to herself. So the minister had not fallen asleep and dreamed. This indeed was real. In order to calm his mind after the meeting with Hester, after so many years of silence between them, he began thinking more clearly of their plans to leave the town. He and Hester had spoken a great deal about their plans during their meeting in the forest, and decided that they would return to Europe with its crowds and cities, which offered them more places to hide than the new towns of New England or all America. The minister's health as well was a concern for the two, as he was too weak to build a new life in the wilds of New England. Therefore, they decided they must return to Europe, where he would find proper medical care for his illness. He had noticed, within the past few days, that a ship had recently come from Europe, and would soon be returning there. Within 3 days the ship would be sailing for England. Hester declared that she would speak to the ship captain about the 3 of them leaving with the ship for a new life. The minister had asked Hester when exactly the ship would be returning to England. She expected it to depart on the 4th day. "That is most fortunate," he had then said to himself. He planned to give a speech to his church on the 3rd day from the present, and decided he would leave his profession after that speech to escape to England with Hester and their little Pearl. "At least the townspeople will say that I have completed my public duties as a minister," he said to himself. Sad, indeed, that he lied to himself so deeply. No man can wear one face to himself and another to society, without finally getting confused as to which may be his true face. The excitement of Mr. Dimmesdale's feelings as he returned from his interview with Hester gave him a great deal of strength, and he hurried back to the town quickly. He remembered the path to the forest being quite difficult to pass, but now he walked quickly, jumping over small streams of water with quick energy, which astonished him. As he walked back to the town, looking at the familiar homes and buildings, he felt strange and excited, still confused as to whether or not he had dreamed his interview with Hester and little Pearl. As he returned, he realized that he was not the same man who had walked into the forest. On his walk home, he was tempted to do strange things that he had never before considered doing, strange and evil things. For instance, he met one of the old respected church officers. The good old man greeted him with fatherly warmth. Now, during the few moments that the 2 men had a conversation, the young minister had to control himself from screaming evil words of the devil at the old officer. And even with this terror in his heart, the young minister could hardly avoid laughing to imagine how the respected religious leader would respond to such evil words. Again, another incident that tempted the young minister. Hurrying along the street, the minister, Mr. Dimmesdale, met an older woman of his church, a poor, lonely woman with a heart full of memories of her dead husband. Yet the young minister had the evil desire to whisper terrible words about her husband, who was suffering greatly in hell, as she soon would. Such words would force the woman to fall to the ground and die in complete shock. Another instance of his temptation to perform devilish acts happened when he walked by a group of young children playing together nearby as he walked down the street. He desired to go near them and explain the most harmful words known during those days. "What is it that tempts me?" cried the minister to himself, after pausing in the street. "Am I mad? Or am I evil? Did I sign my name in the black book with the black man in the forest?" At the moment when the minister, Mr. Dimmesdale, was having these thoughts, he saw old Mistress Hibbins come to him. She made a very grand appearance, wearing a rich dress of elegant material. She walked to the young minister, looking at him with a curious smile.
"So, minister, you have visited the forest,"
observed the witch lady.
"The next time you must tell me, and we shall go together."
"I tell you, madam," answered the minister with a look of confusion, "I do not know what you are speaking of. I did not go into the forest."
"Ha, ha, ha,"
laughed the old lady loudly.
"Well, well, we must talk at midnight in the forest."
She passed on, but often turned back to smile at him, like one that knows another's deep secret. "Have I sold myself to the devil, her leader?" thought the minister to himself. The poor minister, tempted by a dream of happiness which would have been a terrible sin. By this time he had reached his home near the cemetery. He entered the home and looked around at its books, its windows, and its fireplace, with the same feelings of strangeness that he had felt on his walk there from the forest. Here he had studied and written, all while feeling a terrible amount of pain and suffering. He then looked at his writing desk, where he had written his speech that he would give in 2 days, the day before his departure with Hester and little Pearl. He had not finished the speech, however, and sat down to look at it in pitying, angry curiosity. The man who had written that was gone. He was no longer the same man who had walked into the forest earlier that day. Another man had returned out of the forest, a wiser one, with knowledge of hidden mysteries that his former self could never have understood. A bitter kind of knowledge. While occupied with these thoughts, he heard a knock at the door, and the minister said, "Come in." He then saw old Roger Chillingworth enter the room. The minister stood, white and speechless, with one hand over his heart. "Welcome home, minister," said the doctor. "But you look pale, as if you have traveled too far through nature. Let me help you." "No, I think not," responded the minister, Mr. Dimmesdale. "My journey and the fresh air have helped me after being in my study for so many hours. I think I no longer need the help of your drugs, my kind doctor." All this time Roger Chillingworth was looking at the minister carefully. The doctor then knew that the young minister no longer viewed him as a trusted friend, but instead his most hated enemy. The minister was soon left alone in his study, where he destroyed the speech he had already written. He then began a new speech, and worked for many hours into the night before he found himself asleep at his desk, after writing several pages of his speech. Chapter 21. The New England Holiday. Early in the morning, on the day of the young minister Mr. Dimmesdale's speech, Hester Prynne and little Pearl came into the marketplace. There were already crowds of people there to celebrate this public holiday. On this day, as she had for the past 7 years, Hester wore a poor-looking gray dress, which hid behind the bright colors of the Scarlet Letter. Her face, as usual, had no strong emotions present. She had long ago learned to give up her great passion and settle in her role in society as a criminal woman, always to be punished for her terrible sin of passion and love. She realized that this was the last time she would be forced to see the stares from the townspeople as she walked alone with her little Pearl.
"This is your last look at the Scarlet Letter and its wearer,"
Hester thought to herself.
"In a little while she and her scarlet letter of punishment will be gone forever, and the Scarlet Letter will be deep in the sea, never to be seen again."
Pearl was excited to be in the marketplace during the town holiday.
"What is this, Mother?"
cried Pearl.
"Why have all the people left their work today? Is it a play day for the whole world? Why have all these people come here to this marketplace, Mother?" "They wait to see the march pass,"
said Hester.
"The governor and the town leaders will walk by, and the ministers, and all the great people and good people, with the music and the soldiers marching before them." "And will the minister be there?"
asked Pearl.
"And will he hold out both his hands to me, as he did when we were at the stream in the forest?" "He will be there, child,"
answered her mother.
"but he will not greet you today, and you will not greet him." "What a strange, sad man is he,"
said the child, as if speaking to herself.
"In the dark night he calls to us and holds your hand and mine, as he did on that platform there during the night. And in the deep forest, where only the old trees can hear him speak to us. But here, in the sunny day, and among all the people, he does not know us, and we must not know him. A strange, sad man is he, with his hand always over his heart." "Be quiet, Pearl. You do not understand these things,"
said her mother.
"Do not think about the minister now. Think of the happiness and joy of this holiday today, which begins a new life for us all."
Though the usual human life of the Puritan marketplace was full of sad gray, brown, or black colors, today there were bright red and yellow colors in the market. The town leaders, of course, dressed in dark black clothing, looking strict and serious. Old Roger Chillingworth, the doctor, was seen to enter the marketplace speaking for a great while with the captain of the ship that would be leaving for England the following day. He had explained that he would be boarding the ship along with the young minister, Mr. Dimmesdale, his closest friend, and that Hester Prynne and little Pearl were to board first, and the two men would join them later. Hester discovered this information after speaking with the captain some time after she noticed the old doctor in a conversation with him. "So, mistress," said the captain to Hester, "I have just been informed that there will now be 4 persons instead of 3 coming on board the ship tomorrow."
"What do you mean?"
asked Hester, quite surprised.
"You have another passenger?"
"Well, you do not know?" cried the ship's captain. "That Dr. Chillingworth has asked to board tomorrow with the gentleman that you spoke of, he that was in trouble with those old Puritan rulers."
"The two men know each other well indeed,"
replied Hester, looking calm.
"They have lived together for a great amount of time,"
she said, hiding her anger and feelings of hopelessness. Then the conversation between the ship captain and Hester Prynne was over. But at that instant she saw old Roger Chillingworth standing away from the crowds of people, smiling at her, looking more evil than he ever had before. Chapter 22. The March. Before Hester Prynne could consider what to do after hearing this terrible news, the sound of the music for the great march began. The town leaders would soon be walking proudly down the streets, followed by the ministers of the community. After the long march, the minister, Mr. Dimmesdale, was to give a speech. Soon the march began, and the town leaders were seen. Little Pearl clapped her hands, excited to see the march. After a short time, Mr. Dimmesdale walked down the street, along with the other respected town ministers. The townspeople noticed during this march that the young minister had never before looked so strong or courageous, nor did his hand rest over his heart. There was his body, but where was his mind? He was concerned with the affair with Hester and Little Pearl. Hester Prynne looked at the minister with confusion. He seemed so far away from her now. Perhaps she had dreamed of their meeting in the forest. How deeply they had known each other in the dark forest. And was this the man? She hardly knew him now. He moved proudly past, walking next to the other noble ministers. Hester felt a great deal of sadness in thinking that she had, perhaps, dreamed of the meeting in the forest. Pearl saw her mother looking upset, and looked up into Hester's face.
"Mother,"
said she,
"was that the same minister that kissed me at the stream in the forest?" "Do not speak of that, dear little Pearl,"
whispered her mother.
"We must not always talk in the marketplace of what happens to us in the forest. I am not sure that it was him. So strange he looked,"
continued the child.
"Or I would have run to him and told him to kiss me now before all the people. What would the minister have said, Mother? Would he have put his hand to his heart and looked at me angrily?" "What he would say, Pearl,"
answered Hester,
"is that no one should be giving kisses in the marketplace."
The two continued to watch the march pass on, just as old Mistress Hibbins walked over to Hester with an evil smile on her face.
"Now, what terrible thoughts are you thinking of, Hester Prynne?"
whispered the old lady to Hester.
"That man over there is greatly respected by all the people here. But this minister, are you sure, Hester, that he is the same man that you saw in the forest?" "Madam, I do not know what you are speaking about,"
answered Hester Prynne, quite astonished.
"Foolish woman,"
cried the old lady.
"I have been in the forest many times before. Do you think I go there and not know who else is in the forest as well? Hester, we see your punishment burning on your chest, which is certain. But this minister, why does he cover his heart as if to hide something? Ha, Hester Prynne!" "What is it, good Mistress Hibbins?"
eagerly asked Little Pearl.
"Have you seen it?" "No matter, darling,"
responded Mistress Hibbins.
"You will see it one day, my dear. You will come with me, and we will see it together,"
she told Little Pearl. By this time the march was nearly over, and the minister, Mr. Dimmesdale, was heard speaking to the people. Hester Prynne listened to his voice carefully, but she could not understand his meaning, as she was only listening to the sound of his voice and imagining escaping from the town very soon. Chapter 23. The Discovery of the Scarlet Letter. The powerful but sweet voice that the townspeople had been listening to came to a pause. The young minister's speech to the people had ended. After a short silence, the marketplace became alive again with the townspeople talking and hurrying by. All the people were discussing the amazing speech the young minister had given. Many declared that they had never heard another man speak so wise, so high, and so holy as the minister, Mr. Dimmesdale, did that day. Although his speech inspired the people, it was still filled with sadness, as they knew their dear minister would soon be leaving them, too weak to continue his life, and would soon die. Yes, their minister whom they so loved, and who so loved them all, would soon not be with them, and would soon leave them in tears. As he concluded his speech, he stood facing the people, looking confident and proud. Meanwhile, Hester Prynne was standing beside the platform, with the Scarlet Letter still burning on her chest. To Hester, he looked weak and pale amongst the brave triumph of his speech and grand march. The energy, or rather the inspiration which had given him strength during his speech, was now gone. His face looked like death, so sad and pale. It was hardly a man with life in him. One of the older respected ministers, John Wilson, observing the weak state in which Mr. Dimmesdale was now in, stepped forward to offer support to the poor young minister. Mr. Dimmesdale was shaking with weakness, but decided not to take the old man's arm. He began walking towards the platform where Hester had suffered her terrible public punishment alone. He walked closer to Hester Prynne, holding little Pearl by the hand, and there was the Scarlet Letter on her chest. The minister made a pause. The town leaders watched him anxiously, confused by his behavior. The young minister then turned towards the platform and stretched his arms out. "Hester," said he, "come here. Come, my little Pearl." He looked weaker than ever, but gave them a gentle look of love and achievement. The child immediately ran to him and put her arms around his knee. Hester Prynne forced herself to walk slowly, pausing before she reached him. At this instant, old Roger Chillingworth threw himself through the crowd, disturbed and evil. He went up onto the platform to take away his victim. "Madman, what is your purpose?" whispered the old doctor to his patient. "All will be well, but leave this woman and her child. You will blacken your fame and honor as a religious leader. I can save you still." "Ha, tempter! I think you are too late," answered the minister, looking fearfully into the old evil doctor's eyes. "You no longer have power over me. With God's help, I shall escape you now." He again put his arm out to the woman of the Scarlet Letter. "Hester Prynne," cried the minister, "come here to join me now. I did not have the courage to meet you on this platform 7 years ago, but you give me courage now. Your strength, Hester, has helped me. Come, Hester, come. Support me up on this platform." The crowd became disorderly. The older ministers were silent with shock. They watched the young minister holding on to Hester's shoulder and supported by her arm around him. Old Roger Chillingworth was nearby, connected with the guilt of the minister and Hester Prynne. "You could have gone anywhere on this earth, and I would have found you. But here, on this platform, is the only place you have escaped me," cried Roger Chillingworth angrily. "Thanks to God who has brought me here," answered the minister. Yet he was still weak, and turned to Hester with a look of doubt and anxiety. "Is this not better," he whispered, "than what we dreamed of in the forest?"
"I do not know. I do not know,"
she hurriedly replied.
"Better? Yes, so we may both die, and little Pearl die with us."
"For you and Pearl, God will be forgiving. But He wishes that I now die, so let me take my punishment here on this platform." Partly supported by Hester Prynne and holding one hand of little Pearl, the minister, Mr. Dimmesdale, turned to the respected town rulers and to the holy religious leaders and to the people who had trusted him so dearly and were all now pitying the poor man. "People of New England," cried he, "you that have loved me and viewed me as holy, look at me here as a sinner of the world. At last, I stand here on this place where 7 years ago I should have stood, here with this woman whose arm supports me, who wears the Scarlet Letter so bravely. You have all looked down upon that letter as she walked by each day, but I have walked among you all, and you did not look down upon me. But I am a sinner as well in this crime. I, however, was too weak to stand here on the platform with Hester Prynne. He then moved forward to speak again, ahead of the woman and child. God saw my terrible sin that I hid from you. Now, at the hour of my death, I stand here before you. I ask you to look at Hester's Scarlet Letter. Now, you must know that I, too, have a scarlet letter that burns on my chest as a punishment. With a quick motion, he tore away his shirt to show his chest. It was shown. For an instant the people were silent, looking in horror at the minister's chest. Meanwhile, the young minister stood with a look of achievement again on his face. Then he fell to the platform. Hester partly raised him and supported his head against her chest. Old Roger Chillingworth went to him with a look of confusion. "You have escaped me," he repeated more than once. "You have escaped me." "May God forgive you," said the minister. "You too have deeply sinned." The dying minister then turned his eyes to the woman and child. "My little Pearl," said he weakly, and there was a sweet and gentle smile over his face. "Dear little Pearl, will you kiss me now? You would not kiss me in the forest, but now you will." Pearl kissed his lips, and her father began to cry tears of joy after suffering such guilt for so many years. He looked at her as he cried and knew that she would no longer quarrel with the world, but would now feel human joy and sadness and be a woman in the world. "Hester," said the minister, "goodbye."
"Shall we not meet again?"
whispered she, bending her face down close to his.
"Shall we not see each other in heaven after our deaths? Surely, surely, we will meet again."
"Hester," said he with great sadness, "the law we broke was a great one. I fear that we forgot our God when we committed our crime of passion. God knows, and He will forgive us, but He will decide. Goodbye." The minister then was silent in death. Chapter 24. Conclusion. After many days, many stories about the event on the platform were told. Most of the townspeople promised that they saw a true scarlet letter, just as the one Hester Prynne wore on the minister's flesh. Some decided that after Hester had suffered so greatly on the platform alone, he began harming himself as his own punishment. Others believed that old Roger Chillingworth's evil medicines had produced the mysterious letter on the minister's chest. Others, again, insisted that the letter had come from deep within his body after feeling a great deal of guilt and pain, and that God had placed the letter on his flesh to burn him with pain to remember his terrible crime. Others, however, who declared that they had watched the minister Mr. Dimmesdale the entire time he displayed himself on the platform, swore that there was no mark of a scarlet letter on the minister's chest. Neither, they said, had the dying man admitted to being the mysterious father of Hester Prynne's young child. These observers claimed that Mr. Dimmesdale called the mother and child onto the platform with him to express that we are all sinners, the criminal woman and the respected ministers of the community. This story, however, was told mainly by the young minister's supporters, particularly by the other honorable ministers of the town. After Mr. Dimmesdale's death, no one changed more in appearance than the old man known as Roger Chillingworth. All his strength and energy had been used to harm his patient. Soon enough, the man disappeared from the town and was never heard from again. This unhappy man had made his aim in life to add to the suffering of the young minister. When the evil old man no longer had such a purpose, the devil took him back to hell. It is a curious subject of observation, however, whether hatred and love are not of the same place. Each takes a great deal of emotion from a person. The two feelings seem basically the same, except that one is smiled upon by God, while the other is worshipped by the devil. When the old man Roger Chillingworth died, which took place within the year, he left all his property and fortune to little Pearl, the daughter of Hester Prynne. So Pearl, the strange little child, became the richest young lady in America. After that time, the town came to greatly respect the mysterious little girl and her mother. Perhaps if little Pearl would have remained in New England, she would have married a son of a great Puritan family, but her mother took her back to England, and the townspeople no longer saw the bright Scarlet Letter and the strange little child always nearby. For many years the story of the Scarlet Letter was told to the young children of the town, and the story became famous. One afternoon, many years later, some children were playing near the old cottage where Hester and her little Pearl lived long before. The children saw that a woman in an old gray dress was coming to the cottage. Near the doorway to the cottage, she turned around to see the children, and for one moment the children saw the bright red and gold of the Scarlet Letter on her chest. And Hester Prynne had returned to her shame. But where was little Pearl? If still alive, she must now be a beautiful young woman. Through the remainder of Hester's life, she would often receive small packages or would be seen doing fanciful needlework for a small child. Many had heard that Pearl was alive and happily married. But there was a more real life for Hester Prynne here in New England than in that unknown place where Pearl had found a home. Here had been her sin, here her sadness, and here was yet her punishment. She had returned, therefore, and continued her life of shame, although no town ruler would have forced the holy woman to continue with her public punishment. Never afterwards did that Scarlet Letter leave her chest. The townspeople no longer viewed the letter as a punishment, however, but rather as representing Hester's great strength and bravery. Women would often go to her for help in questions of love and passion. The women respected her to advise them, as they understood that she too had had such passionate feelings before. Hester comforted and advised them as best she could. She assured them, too, that one day they would find happiness with one man as she had. And after many, many years, a new tomb was set right next to her ministers. On the tombstone for the two eternal lovers was written, "On a field, a deep-colored letter A shines brightly."